I'm Scott Allen Miller, and on a previous Sam IT, we talked about how most job listings are fake. But I think a lot of people don't really understand the degree to which things have a tendency to be faked in IT job postings. So I want to talk about that a little bit with an anecdote from my own experience. Now, I used to be a consultant, and so that would mean that I would easily go out and interview several times per week, every week for years on end. Interviewing continuously is part of the job of being a consultant because you're always hopping from one engagement to another. Moving to different interviews doesn't mean a failure in those cases. It's unlike normal in-house employment where you expect to be working at the same place for many years and you only have to interview when something has gone wrong or you need to make a lateral move. In consulting, you often take week-long or month-long engagements and you have to choose between several of them and you may have ones that overlap. So the interview process is literally continuous, especially as many of those projects being very short have a high cancellation rate even when they're real or intended to be real. So you may interview and be accepted, be on a project, and then just before the project starts, it gets canceled. You need to quickly move on to another one. So consultants have a tendency to interview at a rate hundreds or maybe even thousands of times more often than their non-consulting counterparts. And this gives consultants a huge advantage in the market simply because they have a better insight into it. So in my own experience, after years of lots and lots of interviews and just being part of this process on a regular basis, I once got called to an interview in Albany, New York, which was about 6 hours from where I was located at the time, to go do a senior level interview for a major financial institution. I was excited. We had worked out a bunch of details ahead of time. It was certainly not a finalizing the deal kind of interview, but it was a we're very serious and we think that this is a potential match kind of interview. We had already done hours on the phone, so this was a pretty serious interview. Unlike a lot of early consulting, you may just do in-person interviews very quickly because a recruiting firm knows you and moves you around very quickly, so they tend to speak for you and eliminate that first phone call round. In something like this, though, was a big enough engagement that I'd done personally my phone rounds and then moved on to the in-person. I drove to Albany, went to the building of the bank that I was interviewing with, went up to the sixth floor. They had a whole office set up. I did a half day of interviews. They went very, very well. And then for the next following 6 months, it was a constant game of, oh, this project is being held off. Oh, we can't explain why you're not starting right away. And oh, things are going great. And it slowly got more and more fishy. And eventually it started being, oh, it took so long to get you in. Our budgets have changed and now we would need you to accept less money. These kind of things get really fishy, of course. If it was taking a really long time to get me in, you'd think they would be paying more because they need to make up for putting me through more pain. They want to convince me not to walk away, things like that. But there's a lot of politics going on behind the scenes in these type of things. Eventually, it got so fishy that we had figured out that the recruiting firm involved was doing something wrong. And I managed to catch them lying at some point where I actually got them to admit something had been false, something about, and I can't remember the exact detail, but they had multiple managers on the phone, and the one who had dealt with me directly was not there. And a different person who didn't have their lies quite as straight accidentally said something that gave away that they never had the offer in hand that they had said all along. This was the first tip-off. Eventually, there was enough of exposed lies that I decided to follow up with the bank directly, but not through the channels I'd gotten from the recruiter. I decided to go directly to the bank's corporate offices. In speaking to them, it turns out that they had never been hiring this position. They didn't work with that recruiting firm. That recruiting firm was trying to get business with that bank, and so was getting people locally set up so that they could propose them to that bank to hire at that location. The fact that they had interviewed inside the bank's building in Albany was really well done, but fake. They had rented out space in the building that the bank shared, but on a floor that the bank didn't use. They had set up an entire office that looked like the bank, or looked like a bank. Of course, I didn't work at the bank, so I wouldn't know exactly what their internal corporate offices looked like, but it was a completely generic office space in a building that the bank was in, so it was reasonable. They had a full staff sitting in there, they ran interviews in there, and presumably did this for a lot of people to make it all worth it. But there's a lot of money on the line in these kind of situations. Easily between $30,000 and $100,000 for every person that a recruiting company will place at a big financial institution. So if you're dealing with 10 or 20 people minimum, minimum, you're easily looking at many hundreds of thousands or possibly into the millions of dollars worth of revenue off of a small number of people. So if you can rent out an office that's already furnished and have a couple fake people go in for a few hours a day for, say, a few weeks or a month to make a lot of people be on the line, you easily could make a financial justification for the scam. Even though it sounds like a lot of money and effort's being put in up front, it's not that hard to make the numbers work in the long run. So it may be a gamble for them, and it's because of the way that recruiting and job hiring happens in America. It's really, really hard to actually catch someone in a lie in a way that you can take them to court, especially because you don't know how many people they've done it to. You don't know what the end games are. All you know is that the job wasn't what it was presented as, and you can tell when they're running large scams, but you can't prove it in court, and that's how it has to work. So they can pretty much get away with doing this. There's almost no recourse because they didn't actually hire you, because you didn't actually sign a contract, and it was all still in the discussion phases. There's really nothing that you as a potential employee can effectively do about it other than report them to professional agencies and hopefully get the word out. But we don't have very much of that in IT. There's no crosstalk between different IT pros about which recruiters are legitimate and which are not. And a lot of people can't tell which are legitimate and which are not. So getting information from your friends about, oh, this person's, they're fake because they never get me a job. Well, but you have another friend that they get jobs for all the time, and it turns out the one person just isn't very good at interviewing or doesn't have the skills that people need and is bitter and blames the recruiter or whatever. There isn't enough market cross insight to be able to tell from any small number of people, especially with their own perspectives and subjectivity, what is actually true or not. But in some cases, I'm able to take enough initiative in this one case to have followed up to have, it was only because I actively caught the recruiters lying that they admitted to once it was no way to claim it was false, and then followed up with the bank and asked them, had this been a legitimate business transaction that they had decided to turn down? And they openly admitted that they were in no way involved. But this kind of stuff really happens. This is an extreme case, and that's not what I expect most people will ever find in their careers. But what people will find is things like fake job postings and fake interviews, not with that level of setup, quite often simply for jobs that they don't intend to fill or have very little interest in filling. But there's a lot of money on the line for potentially being able to fill them. And when we understand that, it makes sense why the market is the way that it is. Thanks for joining me here on Sam IT today. I hope that this anecdote is useful in helping you understand just how risky and how complicated the job hunting process can be in IT and the things you have to look out for. Remember to like and subscribe and support us on Patreon, and join us for our next video. We'll be talking more about careers and how you can look for fake companies and fake job listings and what you can do about it.